our status?
Perimeter security's down, but plenty of your flying friends about.
Fucking hell.
After a delay that pushed the release from March to October, Watch Dogs Legion is finally releasing just weeks before the start of the next generation. Having completed both Watch Dogs and Watch Dogs 2, the third game in the series was quite anticipated by yours truly. Watch Dogs 2 showed a marked improvement in gameplay and atmosphere, and I expected Watch Dogs Legion to achieve similar improvement. To understand where Watch Dogs Legion picks up, let's quickly summarize the series. Watch Dogs puts you in the role of Aiden Pierce in Chicago, a city that utilized Bloom Corporation's CTOS. Eventually, CTOS 2.0 was rolled out into other cities, including San Francisco, where you play as Marcus Holloway in Watch Dogs 2. While both games have their own stories to tell, the games feature a constant struggle between hacking group DedSec and their enemies, including Bloom. The games have an overarching theme that technology is increasingly being integrated into society, and it's threatening data, privacy, and security by those who control it. Watch Dogs Legion takes place in the near future, set in London in a time where technological advances have put millions into unemployment. After early in-game events send members of London's DedSec cell into hiding, state surveillance, private military, and organized crime have all strengthened their grasp on the city. Protests, crimes, abuses of power, and more take place on nearly every street corner. The narrative itself is interesting, touching on some issues that hit very close to home. But some of it is also a bit predictable. At the outset, players are tasked to unfuck the city of London as DedSec, though Watch Dogs Legion takes a different approach than the first two games. There's no main character in Watch Dogs Legion. You play as whoever you want to recruit. No, you aren't creating your character, but instead deciding which of a set of generated characters you want to play as. At the start, you're provided with a choice of various characters to take on as your first recruit, before joining up with DedSec. From there, you can literally recruit anyone you choose off the streets. While the game does force you to recruit certain types of characters for specific missions, you can just as easily dismiss them right afterward. DedSec's AI, Bagley, also points out some suggested individuals for you to recruit, but you can just as easily ignore them as well. While the game essentially puts you into the role of DedSec, there are a couple of key NPCs that play a role as well, such as the aforementioned Bagley. You might wonder how the main story is affected without having a main character, and quite simply, it's harder to connect with the story and characters you control. Setting aside trying to reason why new recruits are suddenly trusted with dangerous and sensitive information, it's also a bit difficult determining who you really are in the story. Though a character's demographics, occupation, associates, and metadata can be found in a menu, these are randomly generated and they don't necessarily match up with their recruitment quests. Think of it as playing as a random NPC in any game, except you can't switch back to the main character. That said, the play as anyone mechanic is pretty great, especially when you put the story aside and decide to just mess around with scanning random passersby. The mechanic works like this. You identify a potential recruit, determine how to influence them into joining DedSec, and then complete a specific mission. This can vary depending on the character as well as their feelings towards DedSec, but ultimately they all follow a very similar path. Some of the characters you can recruit have interesting occupations, from things like anarchist to hypnotist or signals intelligence response officer, or even a spy. Some of the more unique professions have special abilities or equipment, like the hypnotist who can switch a character's allegiance, or the spy who has a spy car that can fire missiles and turn invisible. All the characters have customizable outfits, including masks, and if you enable permadeath, they can all die as well. Aside from that shiny new play-as-anyone mechanic, Watch Dogs Legion is an Ubisoft open-world game through and through. If you aren't quite sure what that means, it boils down to that there are a lot of things to do. Apart from the main quest and various side missions and recruiting characters, there are collectibles galore, upgrade points, and a general inability to run out of things to do. The game features your typical open-world navigation, including running, cars, boats, and even construction drones you can ride on. If you haven't played a Watch Dogs game before, a hacker group operating in a technologically advanced society means there's a lot of hacking to do. This ranges from hacking cars, to distracting enemies, to using a spider bot to infiltrate a gang hideout, and a lot more. Players can unlock various equipment and upgrades throughout the game, equipping them on characters as they see fit. The equipment can really play a big role in missions, so it's important to unlock pretty much as you can. Watch Dogs Legion's missions are generally all kind of the same, involving the need to infiltrate a specific location and complete whatever some objective may be. Really, this is where the gameplay shines, depending on your character choice. Players can tackle these however they see fit through combat, stealth, or hacking. It doesn't matter whether you shoot your way in from the front door or use a drone to help sneak in, as long as you complete the mission. But proper recon and intelligence gathering will make these missions more survivable. It's particularly important if you're playing with permadeath on. Watch Dogs Legion also looks good. Our review was conducted on the Xbox One X, so the next-gen versions should look even better in theory. It looks and feels how a AAA game should look in 2020. Although there's some limitation given that this is an open-world game, it still looks relatively solid. It looks and feels like London. It should be noted that just like the open world, the UI has a lot going on. Maybe too much. On the screen at any one time could be mission objectives, the mini-map with various icons, indicators of your enemies, your equipment, or your equipment wheel, or your hacking target, or your scanned connection paths, not to mention the gameplay itself. Well, you're going to eventually learn to tune some things out. There's a lot to look at, and it can be overwhelming, especially at the start. Likewise, the audio itself assists in making Watch Dogs Legion feel authentic to London. From the music selection to the voice acting and the various talk show radios, the audio makes the world feel really alive. It's especially fitting to the setting and atmosphere. The only knock I can really give to the audio is that the lip syncing doesn't quite match up with generated characters. It's just another hurdle to not having a real main character. Watch Dogs Legion will be largely characterized by its play as anyone mechanic, and for good reason. The mechanic itself is really interesting, especially with how it connects characters to others in the world you might run into. Unfortunately, the mechanic does take away from the main story as it replaces having a main character, and it disconnects you from the narrative. It's hard not to characterize Watch Dogs Legion as Ubisoft open world game with hacking, but that's exactly what this is. It's not inherently a bad thing, but I believe they could have done more with the new mechanics without taking away from the other portions. Overall, Watch Dogs Legion is a fun game with a shiny new mechanic that can be utilized in many different ways in the future.
You might kill someone driving like that.